welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. I have the great pleasure to introduce Dutch Schwartz, who is responsible for cloud security, among other things, at Amazon AWS specifically. And, we'll have a casual conversation. It's unscripted. I have a couple of questions in mind, but the idea is to, extract a little bit of knowledge and wisdom from Dutch. And hopefully, we'll all learn from it. So Dutch, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Typically I start asking the question, whether, which one is your favorite superhero and why? And I typically give people a heads up on that question, but I didn't, so far, but maybe you can give it a shot.
Sure. Favorite superhero. This is going to maybe sound slightly boring, but favorite superhero would be Iron Man.
Okay. Why?
So other superheroes, their powers come from something else, right? So they were born on a different planet, like Thor or Superman. So they're really only super because they happen to be on Earth and interact with us, right? So Iron Man, everything that he does comes from, his own inventions, his own creations. So it's a totally different type of superhero. Plus he's flawed, which I think is, makes it interesting to see him as a superhero.
No, that's really good. I like him too, as well as my kids. Hey, so maybe give us a quick background, your roles, responsibilities, and then also walk us through, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of AWS, so I'm really a customer-focused resource, right? So I work with, our customers, typically cloud architects, security architects, directors, CISOs, and I help them, depends on where they are, of course, in the cloud adoption and how they think about security. But basically I help them, along with the team of architects and engineers on my team, we help them look at what are your business initiatives, how to create strategies, right, that drive those initiatives. I look at best practices, how do you do best practices, and then just various workshops and things like that. So I'm not internally focused in terms of AWS. I'm externally focused on how do I help AWS customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm assuming you were not born, at Amazon. What was your your career path? How did you,
Sure.
how did you end up in Amazon? You probably,
absolutely.
Yeah.
We have 3 or 4 hours, right? Hopefully. I started my, professional career as a military officer. I was an infantry officer in the Army. And when I transitioned from active duty to the reserves, and I was looking at going back to school and getting a master's, and I ran into a peer of mine, and the space was just taking off. This was in the 90s, by the way, dating myself there. And she was really like, hey, you should go talk to this company who's a reseller. And I said, I don't know what that means. Like, what is a reseller? And it just happened that there was a reseller. It was really more of a systems integrator, but they nevertheless, and they focused on the federal space, and it was like 3 founders and a handful of people. It was very small at the time. And so I kind of got in accidentally, if that makes sense, and thought, okay, sure, I'll do this while I continue to look for other things. Like a lot of military folks, you try to figure out what are those transferable skills, how do you bring those into a totally different role. So in my case, I found something very quickly, and then it was a really good fit for me. And I wouldn't be able to explicitly say that in advance, but I've always really liked technology. I love people and connecting with people. And I like really fast pace. I don't like doing the same thing. I grew up working in a factory. My dad worked in a factory for 40 years, and I'm like, glad you're happy with it. I hate that. That was just absolutely boring to me. So it ended up being really good. And so from there, I did networking for maybe a decade, off and on, in different types of companies. And then I made a transition to looking at security. Right, so networking was getting very commoditized. There wasn't, at the time, it's changed again, of course, but at the time it was, it was very commoditized. There wasn't a lot of really cool, interesting, exciting things happening in that space. So I started looking at, security. I'd done a few projects like network access control and a handful of things where this is really interesting. So that's where I made a shift and tried to go into security.
And what do you recommend, for people that are, being released now from the military and trying to get into cybersecurity? I mean, there's some transferable skills, obviously.
Yes.
It's kind of a mindset as well, right? Being part of this kind of the armed forces. What would be your recommendation for someone trying to get into the industry right now?
Yeah. So the good news is there's a pretty strong community, right? There's tons of people you can get engaged with via LinkedIn or whatever platform you feel comfortable with. But there's a lot of folks who are trying to help veterans and even active people as they're about to transition to get in the space. So a couple of things. One of the things is when you think about the transferable skills, it's not whatever it is you happen to do. It's also all of the soft skills, right? So I talk about that a lot, right? Because those do transfer, right? You probably had a very high level of responsibility, regardless of what exact segment of the military you're in, and those are the skills. I mean, certainly you can get certs and you can do the sort of kind of black and white like technical skills, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do those, but what will likely make you stand out as a candidate is the rest of the skills, right? And that's important to look into those. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It's kind of a good segue because I've seen that short video you posted. You talk specifically about the soft skills and how
Right.
they're more important now than ever. Maybe you can kind of jump in and talk about it specifically. You mentioned an article or paper from 1972
Right.
about people and paper, right? The soft skills, that's what they were determined to basically mention, this people and paper, but it was 1972.
Right.
And then maybe you can kind of walk me through,
Yeah.
of why do you think that, this particular area is more important now than ever?
Yeah, I started with, it's a topic that's been, on again, off again for the last 10 years. And I thought, sometimes soft skills, even the word was sort of used pejoratively, like, oh, well, that's a soft skill thing, right? And sometimes you different cultures be like, oh, we need to, improve everybody's soft skills. But it felt very like a point in time, like, and then we checked the block and we sort of moved on. And I thought, well, I don't even know where this term came from, right? And that's what led me to do the research. And it was just serendipity that it happened to be not done by the Army, but on behalf of some research that was being done, some psychologists and sociologists were doing that they pulled into the Army. And then so really the term simply meant a hard skill, air quotes, was I'm using a tool, I'm a mechanic, I'm doing something that's really physical. A soft skill was simply everything else that they were never made a delineation that one was better or worse. It was just a way to categorize the types of skills. And over time, we kind of morphed that term into meaning communication skills and interpersonal things, et cetera. And to answer the second part, the reason I think it's more important now is that as we move, as the fourth industrial revolution continues to heat up, or digital transformation, if you prefer, those human skills are even more important. Right? Because if AI ML can do it, or if a system can do something that's repeatable, we should let it do that. Right. So that means to really set yourself out, ahead of your peers or candidates. If you're looking for a new role, it's all the rest of those experiences and skills, and you need to be comfortable, to bring those to the interview, to bring those to the table. Say, hey, maybe I had a different background, or I have people who've had a break in their career because of family reasons or whatever. You still have great skills, and you need to bring that to the forefront. And I feel like, to be candid, 20, 25 years ago, there was a lot more internships. There's a lot more ways to get into a company, right? Where we recognize that, hey, hire good, capable, smart people, and then, we'll teach them the things. And we don't see as much of that anymore. And I think that's a bias, quite frankly, in not only our IT in general, but in cybersecurity, that you have to have, we see these posts all the time about the ridiculous amount of experience. They want you to have 27 years of experience on Kubernetes or something. It doesn't exist, right? And I think it's easy when you're doing a job description to say something concrete like that, because it's harder to find the other skills, but they're more important skills, quite frankly.
Yeah, and you specifically mentioned creativity, problem solving, dealing with ambiguity,
Yes.
communicate ideas, and influence others to move forward, which I found fascinating. How would you apply these to cybersecurity specifically? I think that there's definitely an area here where recruiters, or even companies that are out there, they're not specifically looking for these skill set. They're more focused on the tech skills.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that is shaped by two things. So one, there's a good study, and the output of that study, from a kind of commercial that you can go pick up standpoint, It's called the Fyi Book, and it's just 67 competencies, and it's just really an intention of what are the different competencies you might need for a specific job, right? And I happened to get trained on that a long time ago, and for me personally, having been in the military and working at multiple large companies, I had done Myers-Briggs, I had done fill in the blank, all the different things. What I liked about that particular research for that book was it doesn't make a judgment like you should be better at this, or it just says here they are. And then I could build job descriptions based on those 5. And what I like about that is it's kind of a clean way of looking at it. Those skills are so critically important. So to sort of put it in today's terminology of cybersecurity, we talk a lot about people, process, and technology, right? And that's a very valid way of thinking about it. In my observation, it's rarely the technology. It's sometimes the process. It's almost always about people, right? So whether you're talking about things that didn't go the way you intended or you want to improve. So if you want to improve things, you need to start with the culture. You need to start with the people, right? You can figure out the process and the technology. It's really, again, it's tangible. It's easier to talk about something physical or a particular solution, right? Like this XYZ product, but that's likely not the real the real bang for your buck, right? It's really, you got to do all the other things first. So that's why I said those things are really important. Creativity, problem solving, influencing others, coming to consensus or not consensus, right? And deciding how we're going to move forward.
So there are a lot of courses online on the technical side, right? Mm-hmm. How do you improve yourself on these other areas of, the soft skills area?
Yeah, so there's just sort of a growing, you're absolutely right. Whether you pick, any of the platforms, right? It's really easy to say, oh, let me learn about Agile, or let me learn about, specific, Python. It's harder to pick up these other skills, but they are out there. So you can, there's a body of work that's kind of grew out of all the emotional intelligence research, right? And so there's plenty of, there are courses around that. So you can do things on emotional intelligence. You can do things on negotiating. There's a good book, and I brought this up in one of my other videos. It was recommended to me by a friend of mine who's another veteran, and it's called Range. And it's kind of a counterweight, right, to the 10,000 hours theory, was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, and that's an excellent work as well. But Range, I think, resonates today with people more because what it talks about is, you really need multiple experiences across disciplines to really be great. There's kind of a couple paths. One is that Tiger Woods, I'm just going to do the one thing path, right? But that's a really long path for a lot of people, and it might be more useful to have 2 or 3 skills where you're above average, and that actually makes you great.
Maybe there's a place to provide certifications, right, on creativity. It almost sounds like an oxymoron, actually, but and then problem solving and so on.
Great.
Shifting gears a little bit.
Right? You can teach yourself to be a more creative thinker.
Yeah,
right? And that's a trait. That's where I think sometimes we get lost on. We think that soft skills are sort of a unspoken thing. That soft skills are just sort of the way David is or the way Dutch is. That's not true. The research now shows that they're all trainable. We can all get better at it. All we have to do is find some resources and go work at that, right?
Yeah, totally. Completely agree with you. So shifting gears a little bit, just from your day-to-day job. I mean, you're obviously, facing very large customers, looking to expand their cloud services and so on. And Amazon is definitely dominant in the space. What have you seen, since COVID-19 hit, and, like in terms of rapid adoption or, quicker adoption to the cloud, and then maybe some of the kind of the challenges that, this whole event created?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think that we look at the cloud adoption as a journey, right? And again, I'll try to be consistent and fair, right? So irrespective of a provider, that it's still a journey as you move from what your premise structure was, your controls, the way the workflow. So still a journey. So I think that in some cases we have seen more rapid movement, right? So maybe compressing the cycle on a particular project. But we still start with the same questions, which is, why do you need to put this in the cloud? What is it about this fill in the blank, right? This workload, this application, and moving those. But we have seen some that have gone very quickly into the cloud because of the changing, of the backdrop of COVID-19 for sure. Yeah.
And with the cloud adoption, comes security concern, right?
Sure.
And I find some of it cyclical. There was on-prem, then cloud, then kind of come back to the on-prem. But we've seen that there's a rise in cloud data breaches out there.
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion on the causes and potentially some remediation on that front?
Yeah, I don't know if I could intelligently, sort of talk abstract, about breaches. So what I would say is that as you move to the cloud, you need to think about, again, kind of what is it that we're protecting, right? And and the move to the cloud is an opportunity to take another look at your security strategies. That to me is kind of a better framing, right? So it's not Control X becomes Control B1 or something. That can be done as well. But the real question is, how have we been doing dev, right? How have we been doing security, right, in our existing environment, whether that was totally private or hybrid, and how should we be doing it? Because I would say that as a more of a looking forward future standpoint, it's more useful to say, we're going to be making a change. Let's relook at what we've been doing, right? And so it's sort of not like taking a cut and paste, how do you map that? It's, hey, what should we be doing differently? And I guess the context around that to me is the role of the CISO has changed, right, pretty rapidly in the last 5 years. And so that seems to be kind of well understood at the CISO level, but that needs to trickle down, frankly, to the security teams. And what I mean by that is the reporting structure used to be to the CIO predominantly. And today that's shifted to CEO, CFO, COO, CXO, whatever. And that shift already means that a CISO really needs to focus on the business, right? And that's just a different lens of looking at this, right? What are the business initiatives that you're trying to solve? And then let's come up with a structure where there's always risk, right? How do we document what risks we have? How do we weight those? And how do we measure against those? That's sort of that would be the same whether you decided to fully stay on-prem, right? So to me, the movement to the cloud is an opportunity to rethink how you do security strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some questions here as well. We'll probably go through these. But before we jump into the questions, specifically, do you find that Amazon shared responsibility model, and maybe you can cover some of that, does kind of the opposite, in terms of companies think that, okay, the Amazon cloud is secure, therefore we probably, don't need to put so many security controls over it. And then also the complexity around the Amazon services, which, it's definitely apparent if you look at the vast amount of services available out there, creates some sort of challenge, especially for the smaller, to mid-sized companies that don't have, Amazon, AWS experts out there to deploy and manage these.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two parts of that question, right? So the first is, and I sort of give a short answer, right? So Amazon as a cloud is secure, right? I mean, so there's sort of a significant body of evidence around the securing of the cloud, right? So I'll sort of talk about the second part of that question. That's how do we secure things when we're within the cloud? And really, the shared responsibility models is a visualization of that, right? Try to understand where are the handoffs, right? Because we could build a great big, fantastic exterior wall, and all agree that it's super secure, right? And that's valid. But you also do have to decide what's happening inside of there, right? And so I think it's less about having Amazon expertise. I think that's a reasonable question, but it's getting back to, how do I secure that fill in the blank, that workload, that data, that those are the same things you would have been doing, right, if you were on premise or if you had outsourced that to somebody else, right? So the idea of the shared responsibility model is to give you a delineation, right? So say, okay, we know which of these things, so now we understand who's doing those. You still have to work through security within the cloud, right? And that's a piece that my team specifically helps with is, along with other solutions, right? How do we continue to use the solutions you have today, and how do we couple those with native AWS solutions to secure within the cloud? Because it's it's still a core function, right, of the security team is to secure within the cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a company, I don't know what the revenues are from the cloud, specifically, but when people think about Amazon, they think about Amazon.com,
Sure.
and not necessarily, as a center and provider specifically for cloud infrastructure. Do you find there are folks out there that kind of question whether maybe you should pick like Microsoft? I mean, Microsoft Azure is pretty much the largest competitor, and then Google, Google Cloud. Do you find that in terms of companies' adoption, do you see Amazon as differently because it's not the core business, or is it contributes to that? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's it. I don't think I've been asked that specific question. So in terms of Amazon.com, right, I would agree. So like when I started at Amazon, I would get questions like, "Oh, cool. Do you throw those boxes on my doorstep?" Right? Like like my kids' teachers and et cetera, because that would be the normal sort of orientation. But no, in the technology world, I think that the space is very familiar with that. And the early questions around security of the cloud, which you should always ask those questions, right? I mean, or if you're moving from physical data center A to B, right? I mean, those are valid questions to always ask those. But frankly, that's less of a concern, right? Because there's a preponderance of customers and evidence today, right? So we don't get that question as much. And frankly, if you look at some third-party research, that's actually the reason most customers do move to the cloud, right? Is they say, "Hey, I don't have the expertise to do this. If you and I quit tomorrow, we decided to make bicycles, and we're not technology people by background, we might lean towards a cloud provider, right? Who has this built-in expertise, right? Again, irrespective of the provider, and that makes sense to do that. In terms of, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, I think you did. I mean, do you find the competition, currently? Do you find that ever comes? Why would you pick Amazon AWS over another provider, especially
Sure.
from a security standpoint? Would you be considered less because it's not your focus?
Yeah, no, I don't really see that as a concern. So the rationale that the customers go through and why they would select us is just all the classic reasons just for cloud, right? So scalability, the security, reliability of that, and then it's the breadth of the offerings, right? If the breadth of the offerings is valuable to you, and it and makes sense to you to have that breadth, and then I kind of touched on this with the integration with all the other partners. Those are the main reasons. And so again, if that works for the business, then that really drives what the business choices are, why they would put those workloads or that data or host that application, right, with AWS. So it's sort of less about, it doesn't start with let me compare these two matrices, right, on security. It's what's the right thing to do for the business, right? And if the right thing to do is have the best security, the best reliability, the most offerings, then that's usually the start of that discussion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of organizations out there that have a multi-cloud environment anyway, right? They have you side by side with the other providers as well. So there's an interesting question was brought up here. How do you convince someone that the business continuity is still a requirement, even if we are processing in the cloud?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I guess what's the question behind the question? So it's sort of like, how are you defining business continuity? So yeah, go ahead.
No, I think that the question is, I guess sometimes the perception is that, everything is in the cloud. We don't have to do business continuity because it's, if anything happens, we're good.
Yeah, so there's sort of layers to that, right? So one is, do you have everything in the cloud, right? And so that's one of the questions, right? And then we want to make sure that we're following the best practices, right, for how we have those workloads positioned, right? So that you're in different regions, right? As an example, right? It's a really simple example. So if you follow best practices, right, and we've helped you with that, then that particular workload or application should be fine. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you still need to think about what is continuity if something were to happen, right? So we've sort of solved it at our scale, but we need to make sure that we've done it for your particular business, right? So that's still kind of a question. And there's some economics tools and different things that we have on our end that we try to help people with on that discussion.
So you are, obviously customer facing, right? So you've probably seen a lot of use cases and so on. Every time I think about cloud, I think about NASA, right? How they just spun off,
Okay.
all those servers when they wanted to, process the, one of the moon landers, footage, right? And it's a cool story that people remember. Do you have any stories like that you recently helped with customers? In certain capacity, and you can leave the kind of the names out, and
Yeah,
for the
that's, I
sake
was just, yeah,
of clarity.
I'm trying to think of a good. So what I would say is that there's been multiple instances with COVID-19 where agencies or corporate entities needed to make a shift very quickly, and we feel, kind of on a team level, really happy that we were able to help them move really quickly. So I'll just be generic, get a site up that processes something really quickly over a weekend, right? And so those are really cool ones that on the team out, we can virtual high five right at each other afterwards. So yeah, we've had some really interesting ones where just the speed and the importance of it was really cool after the fact. So, well, it was really cool that we were able to get that up and running so quickly, and we feel we tested it, and it was secure. So that's a pretty fun project.
So do you find that accelerated, or do you find that potentially things are going to slow down after? Hopefully things are going to open up, or is it permanent?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, that's probably a great question for all of us, and we probably need some economists. So from my viewpoint, the customer's business continues as it was, right? So again, in some cases, a project moves forward more quickly than it was, or maybe they picked up some new business or new projects because of changes that happen. But most people's core business, haven't materially changed. And that's not to take away from, again, to be clear, like I'm at very large customer scale, right? That's not to take away from, if you're a small business or personal business owner, that may be completely different, right? But as it relates to agencies and very large enterprises, their core business may have shifted, and maybe we'll look back in a couple of years and go, oh wow, that's really cool. David's company went into a new area, right? But that's always been the case, right? Just like Ball Aerospace got into doing ceramics in World War II. It's that kind of shift, so it'll be cool to look back and say, wow, and after 2008, we can look back and go, oh, cool, Airbnb and Lyft and all these things that came out of that shift. I don't know what they'll be, but there certainly be cool shifts that will occur because of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And from what's also amazing about Amazon, I remember using Amazon Cloud like in the early days, and there's only a couple of different services. Now you log in, and there's massive amount of services out there. What are the innovation from a security standpoint for Amazon? I don't know if there's anything you can share that kind of roadmap of where things are going to to make the cloud more secure.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation in the shared responsibility model portion of where we're trying to provide more services and more integrated services so that you can easily secure that workload or that application in the cloud, right? So there's a lot of emphasis from us to help you make that transition, right? And so to really give you a correlation and context, right, that you would have, there's some advantages to the cloud. And again, I try to be generic to the cloud. There's advantages to the cloud. In a cloud estate, if done correctly, you actually have really good visibility. And so this is an interesting conversation sometimes with customers, because I'm like, hey, coming from prem and hybrid, obviously I did as well, right? And as soon as smartphones existed and cloud applications existed, and then you don't. It's harder to get visibility actually in a cloud estate. If you create the framework correctly and you do a good job with identity, you actually have really good visibility, right? And so what we're trying to do is let's leverage that visibility. Let's do some of the scaling that a cloud provider could do on the backside, right? Around context and correlation. So we're really focused on trying to do those, offer more services that would make it simpler, frankly. So to your point, you don't have to be, maybe if you're a smaller business and growing into the cloud, that you wouldn't have to have that much expertise.
Yeah, it's also interesting that some companies provided a like almost an overlay service to access the Amazon APIs, to control some of that. So there's a kind of ecosystem of that as well.
Right.
So a quick question here from the audience is, what degree do you see clients transitioning from server-based to serverless processing?
Sure. So I don't know if I have an exact percentage. What I would say is sort of there's the two instances that make that be part of the discussion, right? One is I'm going through my normal cycle of looking at my my applications, and it's the right time for me to make a transition. And so now this is just another option, that I can go to. The other is kind of on the opposite end, which is I'm starting with this thing from scratch, right, from a greenfield standpoint. And so maybe today, or as I move forward in the next 6 or 12 or 8 to 18 months, maybe the right thing to do is just go serverless right from the beginning, so that I again can abstract that and really just focus on what's the code, what are the functions, what am I trying to do. So I do see more adoption of that as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So, maybe like a one, positive note that you've kind of come across, from the transition from, post-COVID, environment, just in terms of your personal life, your work and so on. Is business as usual at Amazon AWS, or is things have changed?
It's busier. to be candid, and I think that would be consistent if I talk to my peers at other similar companies. It's actually busier, and so I think in terms of the upside, I hope that the longer term ramifications, again, not really specific to me or Amazon even, is people will be comfortable that you hire smart, dedicated people, they're going to go do good things, right? So when I started being a remote worker back in 2003 timeframe, it was a little bit unusual, right? And I would get people who would ask me, "Hey, how do you know what your team's doing today?" Because I had a team in the U.S. and Canada, and I said, "I don't. Well, I mean, right this second, I don't know what they're doing." And they just was really, you could see it just caused them anxiety, like, "Oh my gosh, like I need to see my people know what they're doing." And I'm like, right, but I mean, of course, there's metrics and outputs and whatever the role and the team does, right? That I obviously I look at and measure, but also I was less fixated on, hey, look, if David can get his work done today in 5.5 hours, rock on, David. Like you have to be, if you're customer facing or internal customer facing, you have to be available, right? But I like I said, I came out of a family that were farmers and factory workers, and I always thought that was working to the clock was always a terrible idea, right? And then when I was in the military, that was a big discussion around that, right? And so I was always a fan of, I know it says we're going to work until 16:30. I don't care. Like, we're done. Let's just get out of here. Like, we don't have to make it arbitrarily hard. It's already hard, right? It's a challenging job anyway. So I always probably had that kind of just experience that, hey, let's let people do what they need to do, right? And so there's sort of, in some cases, people are like, "Oh my gosh, I have an hour free on my calendar. I have to fill that," And so I hope that the longer, medium to long term impact is, as a culture, we get more comfortable with. I mean, say work from home, just working wherever
Mm-hmm.
you happen to be, and then secondarily, I hope they were okay with people. That one of my kids might come, hopefully not. I put my little sign on my door that says I'm on I'm in a thing. But if they do, it shouldn't be the end of the world, right? And so I think we've, maybe that will be a loosening up as well. That David, if somebody from your family popped in, it would be okay. Like, we sort of like, "Oh my gosh," and then you go scold your child. That shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, in this scenario, the work keeps happening. So, and actually, the results will be better, right? Higher quality, will be happier. So I hope that's an outcome for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I concur. I think that there's there's a shift there as well. They say it takes about 3 months to create a new habit. And
Right.
I think we're just past that cusp of 3 months. And like I said, I think things have tremendously changed, but some for the better. I think that just there's one last question. If you feel like working more than traditional 40 hours a week, because you're basically working all the time.
Yeah, and it's certainly, again, it's certainly something that we have thought about and talked about here. But again, when I talk to my peers and then also customers, right, as well, like we've all noticed this, right, that we're working, and so kind of at a at a team level or a small group level, like we've implemented some things, and hey, like, you just put put lunch on your calendar, like just block it off. Like it's okay. It's okay. Even though you're going to walk to your kitchen and make a sandwich, like block it off, and I've gotten kind of more stringent about not letting like my architects or engineers go too late in the day, because people are working longer hours. So again, I hope we'll kind of, start to, there's a really good recent article in Harvard Business on, this is like the world's biggest experiment, right now, right? We've done little ones about work from home or remote work or remote learning, but we're all just in it, and so there's early data that shows, again, people are happier, the quality of work is good. So yeah, I hope we get to, the point where we cut back on the hours and everybody's, equally happy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I hope that we can maybe meet in person when things kind of open up again.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
Oh yeah, sure. People can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So you can just find me Dutch Schwartz or Dutch26. I'm on Twitter, although I'm sort of a Twitter observer. I like to follow a lot of people on Twitter. I don't tweet myself personally a lot, but I'm on, and then I tend to do these kinds of things. So I'm somewhat involved and usually active with the CISO series. Dr. Cybersecurity is another group, kind of back to your point on kind of mentorship. That one's more oriented on helping people transition in. So I do participate in that. So yeah, happy to connect with people on any of those platforms.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving back to the community, and appreciate you taking time to participate in this session. Looking forward to, again, hopefully seeing you in person in the near future after all this is over. Thank you all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you all in the next session of the New York Information Security Meetup and the Cyber Guild. Thank you again. Thank you all.
Thanks, David.
Take care.